Talk about Edward Snowden. Why were you so surprised that he was 29 when you first met him, when you and Laura first saw him walk up to you in that hotel in Hong Kong?
Well, first of all, he had already demonstrated to me by that point that he had access to some extraordinarily sensitive top secret documents, in fact, large numbers of them, which made me assume that he must be relatively senior. Also, I had spent several weeks talking to him many hours a day online prior to my arrival in Hong Kong, and I could tell that he had a very sophisticated insight into the world of spycraft, into the surveillance framework that had been constructed, into the strategic choices that we would have to navigate as we reported on the story, which also made me assume that he was intellectually mature and therefore probably someone who had been around for a long time. But mostly it was the fact that from the very first conversation that I had with him, he was adamant about the fact that he wanted to identify himself as the source of these disclosures and come forward in the world and say, this is who I am and this is why I did this. And he knew that doing that would likely put him into prison for many decades, if not the rest of his life. And so I think on some level I assumed that he must have been around for so long to become so disillusioned that he was willing to go to prison, but also probably implicitly assumed that if somebody's willing to go to prison for the rest of their life, it's a little bit easier to do so if your life expectation is 15 years as opposed to another 50. And so all of these factors combined to just make me imagine him as someone who was probably in his 60s and 70s. We've all had that experience where we meet somebody online, we drew a mental picture of what they're like and what they look like, and then you meet them in person and it's never what you expect it to be, and this was the ultimate case of that.
All right, I won't call you an ageist, but young people are capable of making worldwide change too.
Well, I mean, that was a lesson that got learned, right? and probably one that I learned as well.
The parts that were most interesting to me were what were happening in Snowden's actual hotel room when he was still there, and you were first meeting with him. You were first recording the interviews, and when he first was watching the news to see the entire world talking about what he had disclosed. What was that like? What was the look in his eyes like? What were the emotions that were playing out on his face? You were there with him.
One of the other things that he said to me in the very first conversation, after he told me that he wanted to come forward, was, of course, I was asking him why he was willing to go to prison for the rest of his life for a story like this, and whether or not he had second thoughts about it or hesitations or was scared. And I remember really vividly what he said because it struck me so much at the time, and he actually said it to me several other times, he said, the only thing that I fear is that I'm going to unravel my life to bring these documents to the public, and there won't be very much of an impact, that the debate won't really be galvanized that we need to have. The public will just sort of shrug, the media will suppress it, will dilute the revelations, and it'll be mostly indifference that is the reaction. And so ever since I knew that that was his principal concern, I felt the obligation that I had undertaken was to report the story in a way to ensure that the debate that ought to take place actually did take place. I mean, I felt like that was my principal obligation, to inform the world of what they needed to know so a real debate could be had. So once we published the story, and I've been writing about surveillance for many years in the NSA, and I know it's very hard sometimes to capture people's attention. These issues can be remote and abstract. They're complicated and hard to make tangible. And once I saw instantaneously the reaction of the media, how intense the coverage was, how seriously people took these revelations, and got to watch him watching that story unfold in a way that was really beyond what all of us in our best case scenario envisioned, it was incredibly gratifying to see that somebody like him had come forward and was able to achieve what they wanted to achieve right from the first day, and it only got better from that point forward.
Did he smile? Did he laugh? Did you guys drink some champagne? What was it like?
He's not really somebody who easily or readily expresses emotion. He's sort of an uber-rational person. But he is a human being and does have emotions, and you can kind of learn to detect them, as subtle as the expressions are. So he would, just say things to indicate that he was extremely pleased. He's not someone who dances around the room and throws parties and drinks champagne because there's a debate about surveillance taking place the way he wanted. And at the same time, there was a lot of work still to be done, even after those first set of stories. And at the same time, we also knew that there was a very high likelihood that very shortly he would probably end up in U.S. custody and put in an orange jumpsuit and shackles and be charged with espionage. So there was always this very heavy tension hovering in the air because of the uncertainty over what the outcome for him would be.
It's an incredibly and weirdly underreported story. the situation with Glenn, to me, is just, it's unbelievable that there isn't more controversy about this.